Hello, everyone. This is Rafi. I'm here with my good friend, Miki Ben-Dor from Tel Aviv, if I'm not mistaken. How's it going, Miki? Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, Tel Aviv.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I had a great impression of Tel Aviv first time I saw it when I saw you over there. So I have very fond memories of it. And I think that's when maybe the idea started hatching that we might write something together. And maybe, 2 years later, we have a paper to show for it. So good stuff.
Right. I took you to Jaffa, I remember.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's when we started talking about the paper.
Yeah, so this paper that I'll briefly mention so everyone is caught up, so that we published together. You're the lead author and really the engine behind this whole push to try to have a new framing of the human positioning in terms of the trophic level. So what we ate throughout the Pleistocene, which is this period of time in our evolutionary history that was really important for shaping what we look like today to a large extent. So it's a big paper. It's about 30 pages. It has 25 different areas of evidence, everything from archaeology to genetics to everything in between that you can think of. So there's a lot to go over. Yeah, and we started talking about how maybe we were more carnivorous than maybe the mainstream of anthropology would suggest. So how did you first get clued into that way of seeing the human trophic level? What first caught your attention?
First of all, it was my personal experience. When eating fat, all of a sudden I became much more lively, more aware, more concentrated. So I thought to myself, this must be the way that hunter-gatherers ate in the past. That was like the initial thing. And then I learned that in Israel, they hunted elephants. This was I was also the lead author of the paper of 2011, Men the Fat Hunters, and then already I said, look, if they actually hunted elephants, it's not like they do it on an afternoon hobby. It's something you have to be very, very good hunter and do it like a full-time job. And also, if you hunt an elephant, it can keep you going for a month. So really, you don't need anything else. So that's the initial like hunch about the fact that we may have been hypercarnivores.
Right, and a hypercarnivore, the technical definition for that is when a species eats about 70% of its calories from animal foods. So that's approximately
more than 70, yeah.
More than 70,
and
yeah.
more.
70 and more. So it's really this upper range where you're going to be, dominating your diet in that manner. And we see wolves eat in a similar manner to us, and we see them very close to us when we look at the stable isotope studies. So we look at the accumulation of different types of nitrogen, and we look at the ratios, and with a bit of common sense and adjustments, we can make some meaningful quantitative comparisons. And the operant word here is quantitative, because a lot of the evidence for what sort of foods we eat has to be quantitative if we're really going to be able to give percentages and estimations. And that's, I think, a big part of the criticism that we're going to talk about today that came back to us for our paper, was that a lot of the arguments were made without explicitly saying when they're quantitative versus qualitative. And I think this is a gap in the literature that we tried to fill. So maybe you want to say more about that.
Yeah, we took the approach, and this is your role in the paper, we took the approach that a lot of the information is really stored in our body. The quantitative approach, trying to find in archaeology a quantitative evidence for eating either plants or animals is hopeless, because plants don't preserve as much as bones. And even if they do, you don't know exactly what they ate, when it happened, because you come to an archaeological site and you find few bones or whatever, you don't know if these bones accumulated over 1,000 years or 1 year. And the same goes for plant residues, if you have any. So this is the problem. The big problem is that people expected archaeologists to provide them with an answer to as to the trophic level of humans and during the Paleolithic, and they just can't do it. But they were asked, so they start to form an opinion and say, and the only thing that they could do is go to what I want to call 20th century hunter-gatherer, just to emphasize the fact that they are in the 20th century and they are not pristine at all. They have neighbors, you know, the Hadza speak 2 languages, each one of them. So they are not separated from their farmers, neighbors. So they went to these 20th century hunter-gatherers and started to measure how much plants and how much animals, and they said, okay, so this is what happened in the Pleistocene, in the Paleolithic. You know, they were flexible according to the ecological conditions. In the north, they ate a lot of meat. Near the equator, they ate a lot of plants. And this is, I think, the main problem with you know, trying to change the mind of scientists, of researchers today, is that they're stuck with this analogy with the 20th century hunter-gatherers. And there is no way you can get a quantitative, like you do when you measure today, or if you go to the field today and you want to measure the trophic level of any animal there. So we said, no, we go to the biology. And do we have a biology of carnivores? Do we have a biology of generalist omnivore, or do we have a biology of specialist omnivore? Because this is, I think, something that is very important to put right from the beginning. That the term omnivore is meaningless in our discussion, because most of the mammals are omnivores. About 80% of them are omnivores. Technically, omnivore is an animal that eats from 2 trophic levels. This is the definition. Now, 80% of the mammals are eating from 2 trophic levels. So yes, we are omnivore, but so are 80% of the mammals. It doesn't say anything about how much we ate and how flexible we were in our consumption. So when you look at the data, about 75% of these omnivores are actually, or mammal omnivores, are actually specialized omnivores. So mammals tend to be either specialized completely or specialized omnivore. Only 20% of them are generalists, so to speak. And by the way, the primates are all specialists. So we come from a specialist animal. Chimpanzee, for instance, is a specialist. They eat more than 70% of their food from plants. So the question was, how flexible are we? And this, I think, we could find in the body, in the biology. Okay.
Yeah, I think the distinction you made there about looking for evidence in archaeological remains versus looking at it in our biology is a nice way of putting it, because we tend to look at what's in front of us, and that is recent hunter-gatherer tribes, and that commits us to looking at a modern adaptation of an ancient way of life. Our genetics are ancient already within ourselves. That's why we can look at that evidence. But those people in those few remaining tribes really give us the ethnographic perspective rather than the deep history perspective. And when we're talking about what we are adapted to, we are talking about evolutionary timelines. And those evolutionary timelines means we have to go deep. Now we can do that looking at cells. We can look back at genetic ancestry with phylogeny. We can look back at, how enzymes help break down starch and what that means for risk of diabetes. And these are all predictions that we can make and verify experimentally. We don't just have to look at the past and take that data in a vacuum. We can actually test out some of the predictions. So when we start doing that, we get a much richer picture of the real dietary flexibility we had. And like you say, we can start being more specific about, okay, we have omnivorous abilities and we can eat from 2 trophic levels, but how did we actually eat? How did we apportion all of that? And I think it is very, in a sense, it is quite new to the field, because a lot of these concepts didn't find some consilience in an overarching thesis. And I think that's maybe where we hopefully move the conversation forward. So many of the people who've commented might not agree, and they gave us a few of their reasons. So maybe I'll start with those, because they're interesting to go into a bit more detail on. So we have our Twitter friend Herman, who is an associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University. And he's interested in metabolism, energetics, human evolution, hunter-gatherer, so perfectly within the field that we're discussing. And he mentioned, for example, that the digestive tracts of carnivores don't really suggest that we have any particular affinity for that specific anatomy, that our guts could reflect some other kind of trophic level. And he was basing that on the work he cited by Magrosky, which I haven't read myself, but I've read a lot of the arguments for how this helps mixed diets that are cooked, who are more energy dense, could explain the smaller size of the gut and the digestive apparatus, because of course starches can be cooked. It's not just meat that can be cooked. So what would you respond to that? That if you can make the energy density argument with cooking for the smaller digestive tracts, and you can make it with meat, how does it help you differentiate in terms of the anatomy of the gut?
There are two facts about the gut. Okay, first of all, if you compare it with chimpanzees, the first one is that it is smaller. So, okay, maybe his argument for smaller gut, because we cook it, etc., it may be true or not. I don't know. But the relations between the colon and the small intestines, this is something that I don't think has anything to do with cooking. In any animal, the colon its job is to get energy out of fiber, right? This is why it's there. Now, fiber you find in plants. So really, the colon is to get energy out of plants. And as we know, most of the animals that eat plants get the energy from the fiber, because most of the energy in plants is stored in fiber. And most of the animals that eat plants, herbivores, etc., are getting the energy from short chain saturated fatty acids that are produced by bacteria, right, in the colon. So the size of the colon is very important. Now, I've calculated, based on the evidence, Milton, that our colon is 77% shorter than what is expected for a chimpanzee of our size. So here you have an evolutionary change that reduces your ability to get energy from a main source in plants by 77%. Now, if this doesn't point you to a change in nutrition, I don't know what does. And if that's not enough, you go to the small intestines. The small intestines are 66% longer in humans compared to chimpanzee. And the small intestines is where sugar and protein and fat get absorbed. Now, sugar, chimpanzees consume quite a lot of sugar because they consume fruit. And sugar doesn't need a lot of intestines to get absorbed. It absorbed actually at the beginning very, very quickly. So really all the rest, the extension, was needed to absorb the protein and the fat. So I don't know who he cites. I didn't realize that he cites somebody for his contention about the gut. But let him discuss. I wish I could discuss it with them, more freely. Mm-hmm. So this is about the gut. This is, I think, is one of the most convincing evidence that we are, you see, there is a criteria for selection for specialization in food, in food consumption, in any animal. And this is a change that not only let you assimilate the food that you are specializing in, but also one that prevents you from assimilating a different kind of food. So it's not that you're just gaining, but you are losing. And this is very, very strong. We lost our ability to get a sizable amount of energy from plants.
Yeah, absolutely. The colon is really only able to ferment an amount of plants that's not really going to deliver, much more than 4% of your daily caloric needs to you, and that's already a relatively generous estimate. So it's really not of much use there. And you've got such an ability to digest amino acids, to digest sugars, to digest starch. That's something we can do fine in the small intestine. So it's interesting because the anatomy is really compatible with a hypercarnivore that can use fallback foods. That's really what it's suggesting. So I think it's again missing the bigger picture, because he was only considering the size, and then you're talking about specific areas and how they change, which is again supportive of what we're saying. So there's also the question of what we should eat versus what we did eat. And one of the arguments that Herman made was that, he says 50% of the calories from fat are, that makes up about 50% of calories from the carcass are from fat, right? And that suggests to him that there's a sort of a fat ceiling in the carcasses that we're stuck at, and that would suggest that we're limited in our fat, and thus that we're going to have to resort to more carbohydrates in order to make up for that energy issue, since we're limited in the protein ceiling. But what I pointed out to him is that there are three different things. You can select fatter prey, so you can decide which animals to stalk. Which ones look fatter, which ones look juicier, are they bigger, are they older, are they weaker? There's all these analyses that come into it. Secondly, you have a technology to extract all of the fat from the carcass. So you can crack open bones and skulls for the marrow and for the brain, something that no other animal can do for the most part. And thirdly, once you've done that, if you're a successful enough hunter, which it appears we are as apex predators, we can select the cuts and we can actually discard whole animals in favor of just certain cuts. And that's a modern practice, and it's also an ancient practice that we do. So when you put all of these things together, a 50% fat carcass is not at all a limitation on fat for an animal that can select the prey, use technology, and select the cuts. And if you add in dog domestication, you also have a use for the discarded meat, higher protein food. So once again, we're looking at a bigger picture here than what's being suggested to us.
Also, Ponze, first of all, I must say that I appreciate his work very much. He's really one of the smartest paleoanthropologists that, in my opinion, that is writing right now, is working right now. He found that we regulate energy. Yeah, that energy is regulated. The total energy that we spend in a day is regulated. This is a very, very important find. So I really appreciate him as a scientist. But because he's dealing with energy, I was expecting from him a little bit more sophistication in that area. You see, the return per hour on obtaining plants, the average, and I have quite a lot of data, and I did the calculation, is about 1,400 calories per hour. Okay. The return on medium-sized animal can be 50,000 calories per hour. So it's, I don't know what, 40 times, 30, 35 times more than plants. Okay. So now let's say that you get a zebra that has 50% fat. By the way, other animals like hippo have 70% fat. I'm sure that elephants also have a very, very high percent of fat. So the 50%, let's take it 50%, it doesn't matter. You take the zebra, and let's say that you can exploit only 40% of the protein, right? And so you can't exploit all of it, all the protein. Let's say it has 50% is even, but let's say it has 60% protein and 40% fat, and you can exploit only 40% of the protein, whatever. So you have an alternative now. Do you get another zebra, or do you go get plants? I mean, there's no question about it. I mean, it's just crazy to think that people will go get plants at 1,400 calories per hour of work when they can get a zebra for 50,000 calories per hour of work. So yes, people did get plants, and mainly when the plants were just so available to them that they didn't cost that much, or the return was because the 14 is of course an average. But, and also if you have like women that don't hunt and they don't have an alternative but to collect plants. And on that we also wrote something in the paper that was not necessarily the case during the Paleolithic. It's more the case now than it was in the past. But let's not get into the details, too much detail. The thing is, from an energetic point of view, the best alternative is to get another animal and not to go get plants. Now I actually managed to tell it to him, and his reply was that, yeah, you didn't take into account the search cost.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to understand that in models of optimal foraging, the search costs don't go into the model. This is what they decide, and this, by the way, goes for any animal, not just humans. When you want to know what is the optimal foraging strategy, don't put the search cost in it, because I don't want to go into it why, but they don't. Nobody does. But let's say, okay, so he got this search. He said, but the search. But then look at what the search costs. The search is just the walking energy, okay? So if you spend if your basic metabolic rate is 1,800 calories, and the walking will add 400, 500 calories to the cost. Okay, so let's say you spend 3 days looking for a zebra, okay? So 3 days of 400, so it's 1,200 calories out of the 50,000 calories that you get per hour. The zebra itself has maybe 400,000 calories. So it's meaningless. The search costs are meaningless. So this is why I'm a little disappointed with this. He's supposed to think about, about energy. Anyway.
Right, because of course how much, even if you're persistence hunting and you're trying to have a scenario where you would expend a relatively high amount of energy, he would know better than us how little a difference this actually makes, whether you're walking or persistence hunting. In the end, your caloric difference is not going to change that much, and regardless, the reward you get for it is so orders of magnitude more than even an exaggerated amount of time spent searching. There's no way you can change the input of the calculation and end up with something favoring plants. I mean, you could see how, as once again, as a fallback food, meaning in a context specific situation, that's sort of the exception that confirms the rule. You can see where they would be favorable, but as over long periods of time, just these returns are so large that they're going to predominate over whatever fallback situation you might have with plants, even at different latitudes, which is what is interesting, because this isn't just an ice age phenomenon. It's also in warmer climates that hunt, gathering food that's quite fibrous and which you cannot obtain calories from. You can only obtain it from the digestible starch, which there is very little in. And the Hadza, which he has studied, spit out the fiber. They don't even get the fiber that a lot of the microbiome folk are telling us about. In the end, you end up in a situation where if you're making an investment, the animal is going to be the most lucrative one in the majority of cases.
Right. So you have to, it's very difficult for somebody like him, I think, to imagine an ecology where animals are so abundant that plants don't really play. I told him, go to Ngorongoro, this is the reserve that is close to the Hadza, where the Hadza live. They're not allowed to hunt there, okay? But if they were, they wouldn't bother with plants. By the way, okay, never mind. But
when you ask them, when you ask these people, it is not their favorite food is not the tuber. It is the meats. And what kind of men do women want? It is the hunter. It's not the gatherer. There's just, whether from the cultural to the technological to the again to the anatomy, all these things have support from different areas. So it's not just a question of showing that at lower latitudes there are more plants. You then still have to run through the calculation, the optimal foraging strategy, even if you include the search costs.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I think, I think the biological evidence is so strong,
Hmm.
and so they just ignore it. I mean, for somebody to read it, go through it, and then ignore it and start to argue about the things that he's arguing about is like, hey, I mean, look at the
Yes, and
biology.
the problem, Miki, is that I was reading some of the references he shared, and which some of the references are his papers, even from one from 2018. You know, he's still someone who thinks that salt is a negative in the modern diet, right? So it's hard when you have these ancient myths that color the picture, because it puts everything into question. So that that's it's like the intersectionality of ideas. If I know that you think this about salt, I can guess what you think about obesity and how you can lose weight and so on and so forth. We can make those
Yes, but
predictions.
can you argue with the fact that we have a very, very acidic
Right.
gut? I
Yeah.
mean, can you argue with the fact that we have adipocytes morphology that is typical of carnivores and untypical of omnivores? I mean,
Right.
and all the genetic evidence that we brought, for instance, that chimpanzees open areas where they genetic genes that are helping in assimilating glucose, and we actually do the opposite of chimpanzee, and opening or closing, I'm not sure which one now, but actually we're operating genes that help to assimilate fat. So it's like, how can you ignore? I mean, I tell you, I'm amazed at the capacity of the human being to ignore evidence. We have unlimited capacity to ignore.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so happy that we managed to put 25 lines of evidence. And 25 is actually more than 25, because, archaeology and zoology and paleontology and ethnographic, they're all more than one evidence. But it's I think that after a while, people will just have to face the evidence.
It'll take a while, but to get back to the stomach acidity. So the point that Herman raised was that with an acidity of a pH of 1.5, this is equally suggestive of scavenging than it is of carnivory. But however, that's actually even more in support of what we're saying, because we're saying not only were we scavengers, we were also hypercarnivores. So it's only reinforcing the point upon which we're making it. So I
Yeah,
didn't
he
understand.
himself,
Yeah.
he must know, he must know that humans are a very special carnivore. They are not the carnivore that just get the animal and eat it in like half an hour, as much as they can, and then get away to let other animals get. We take it to a central place, and we sort of we just live on the thing for a week, for days, for weeks, maybe even months, if we got ourselves a nice elephant. So we are like a scavenging carnivore, okay?
Right.
This is what we are. And this is, in our opinion, the proof, not only that we were carnivores, but that we were carnivores of large animals that we could eat for days and weeks. This is why we have a scavenger acidity.
Right. Serves us
And this
well.
is and this is very simple explanation. It's not like something that you have to, it's not like a very complicated explanation. It's simple explanation.
Right. It's
Anyway,
actually
it's frustrating.
parsimonious, because you can explain the scavenging and the hypercarnivory behavior, which is what you would need to explain with that stomach acid. So That's another point that he had brought up, and I guess
You
we
know,
can,
maybe coming back.
yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just want to come back a little. You know, we talked about that people ask archaeologists, paleoarchaeologists, you know, for trophic level, and they are not in a position to give the answer. But really, in archaeology, there's one quantitative method to find the trophic level, and this is stable isotopes. Now we put the table and we show that all the studies of stable isotopes show that until towards the end of the Stone Age, really like maybe 10, 15,000 years before the end, which is less than 1% of the Stone Age itself, yeah, all the studies show that we were carnivores. Now, how can you continue to ignore that? This is archaeology. This is like chemistry. And this is, and it's not one, and it's not two, and it's not three. I think we put like maybe 20 studies, all of them showing the same result.
Yeah.
So I don't know. How can you continue to ignore that? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a good question, and you know there is also always the question of confounders. But what's really interesting, and we didn't include this in the study. This came to my attention later on, but there has been some good comparisons with pastoralists and modern hunter-gatherer tribes. They were comparing the stable isotopes of some pastoralist modern tribes, where they can verify the diet and then compare it with the stable isotope readings from the Pleistocene. And they're actually quite concordant, which is a good way to verify that the confounders aren't having this massive effect, and we can actually, it's still useful to us.
Right. I've also added, there was a paper, actually it was in preprint when I cited it, but it collects data from also from New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, when they eat a lot of tubers, and from the Eskimos and from other populations where the diet, as you say, is known, and the stable isotope has no confounders. It shows what it is expected to show. So it's quite reliable. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's probably the strongest piece of evidence, together with, well, it is actually a part of our biology. The isotopes literally are. So, like you were saying initially, we're back to evidence from the body. So that's a pretty strong evidence. But you know, there's Dr. Paul Saladino and Anthony Gustin of Perfect Keto, who both went to Tanzania and spent some time with the Hadza and got to observe them and ask them questions. And it was striking to me that they seemed to sort of clarify a lot of the confusion that's in some of the ethnographic literature, because it was quite clear that the tubers that they used were either for medicinal purposes, so didn't really have much of a caloric value. They had more some interesting alkaloids or other substances present, for example, for a stomachache. And then the ones that they would be consuming more so like food was closer to something that they would chew on, a very low caloric value, and they would spit out the fiber. They would not consume it. Just like we do with many vegetables nowadays, where we put the most fibrous parts to the side and we eat the stuff we can actually absorb. So I think, you know, there's been some confusion in the ethnographic literature and some very common sense observations and understandings of how people select their food can clarify a lot of that up.
No, they also have some tubers that don't contain that much fiber. But, you know, for instance, just take the tuber situation. The tubers are obtained by the women. The women can go out, for an extended period of time, looking for tubers because there are no carnivores in the area. If you had animals like in the Ngorongoro, okay, if they went out there they would have faced lions and leopards and what have you, and dogs, wild dogs, yeah. Women first job is to guard the children. So the situation is completely different there. By the way, I think they said, I don't remember if they said it, Paul Saladino, but today what bothers them is being raped by their neighbors, the women, when they go. So they always have one male to accompany them. So you just can't compare the situation of the Hadza today in this ecological condition where the place, there are no elephants, there are no real abundance of animals like you have in a game reserve, or with the number of species that were living, a million years ago to today. The circumstances are so different in so many ways that you just can't use the analogy. Just can't use it. It's more misleading than leading.
Right, and this is the problem of ecological validity. And it's something that's not only confined to field studies or archaeology or ethnography. It's also present in RCTs. When people perform randomized controlled trials on sleep, for instance, and they're doing it in artificial light environments with completely non-evolutionarily congruent patterns during the day of living and moving and all that, you get massive problems. You get the literature saying that sleep hygiene makes close to no difference. But of course, how can you say that? Because as soon as you put people outside in nature where they're camping, then you see their biology, their cortisol, their melatonin completely switch. Within 24 hours, I think you get about 70% of the reversal from a lifetime of circadian disruption. So that's a profound effect. And now you have to consider sleep hygiene in a totally different way, because you're seeing that in the lab environment, it's not telling you the same thing. And we have the same problem here in terms of what humans were eating. If we're just looking at the modern circumstance without understanding what has changed, we're just gonna, like you said, we're gonna be more in error than towards something resembling truth.
Right. No, the problem of experiments being simulations. Well, this is something that we tend to forget. Any experiment is a simulation, and you can never get a perfect simulation. Actually, far from it, especially with food. So RCTs are problematic. But I understand why the flexibility concept is attractive to somebody like Ponzer, who been to the Hadza, who saw it in his own eyes. It reminds me a little bit of the people who talk and say that the best diet is a balanced diet. Okay, what is a balanced diet? A balanced diet, you can eat a little bit of that, a little bit of that. This is a sign that the guy doesn't know anything. In other words, it's just, if you don't know, let's make it like, okay, a little bit of everything. So it's very appealing for paleoanthropologists who's asked what was the trophic level in the Paleolithic to answer a little bit of everything, because really they don't know. They don't have and this is a sign that they know. To say that a little bit of everything is exactly the sign that more likely than anything, they don't know. They just don't know. And we come, you and I, and the Anatomical come, and we say something that is clear. In other words, we say, no, they were hypercarnivores. Boy, this is like a crime, It's how you know that we can't know, we have to be careful, we are scientists, blah, blah, blah. And it's all a cover for the fact that they don't know.
I think
And
they're falling
so they
into
want to
a,
contain.
yeah, I was saying, I think they're falling into a cognitive trap. And the cognitive trap is similar to what happens in certain papers where you can give results by the mean or by the median. And depending on the data you have, the mean is very susceptible to big changes. And so you can regard these outlier points, which is equivalent to the flexibility, the dietary flexibility of humans. And people say, oh, look how this changed the mean. And you get this very middle of the road sort of mean result. If you use a median, then you're going to allow for these outlier points, which would be, you know, the Kitavan essentially, if we're analyzing, looking at them as the example, basically. They could be 70% carbs, 60% carbs, right? But it could still be true if you look at the median that humans were, in fact, hypercarnivores. So it's a difficult cognitive trap, because if you don't understand how statistics work in that regard, it's going to be hard to catch that mistake. And I know Herman certainly understands those statistics, so I hope he'll be able to incorporate that. And I guess the other thing I wanted to mention is that when it comes to the stable isotope studies, this is not a new field. By the way, it's the stable isotope studies have been done for decades. And, you know, it's something that's been accumulating for a while. And like you said, the studies are consistently showing the same result. Whereas if you look at things like dental calculus, it's much more murky, harder to interpret, non-quantitative. And yet that's a lot of what people will refer back to.
Yeah, no, the dental, they're so happy every time they publish something, you know, they say, you see, this is the proof that they ate a lot of plants. You know, they ate plants. Nobody argues with that. Right. It's like, you know, they claim that, you know, other people say that humans ate only animals. No, we ate plants. Of course we ate plants. But how much plants, you know? The problem, the main problem, in my opinion, of this this method is that actually the plaque tend to accumulate when you eat carbohydrates. So it's a question of chicken and egg, you know. It's just not a random sample. It's a sample, right. And by the way, they never tell you how many teeth were without plaque. Right. Okay, they just tell you the ones that they found with the plaque. So there's no, I mean, you can do a little more quantitative studies when you take all the teeth and see percentages, etc., etc. Maybe you can do something. But right now, the way it is, it just proves one thing, that we ate plants. And this is somebody nobody ever argued about.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny because what you're really proving is that they had starch in their teeth. That's still not telling you that they're eating it. For that, you would have to look at the stable isotopes, because they could be having those starch granules for a variety of reasons. No less that they're, you know, using their teeth to process the plants, or they're using it for medicinal purposes. You know, there's another layer.
I wouldn't argue too much about it.
I don't know.
I wouldn't argue too much
use,
about it. Yes, they ate plants.
It's extensive.
No, yes, but you see, they claim that they found cooked starch. So, okay, so they ate some starch, no question about it.
Fair enough.
I mean, you find there are other evidence. There are other evidence that they ate starch. Yeah. There's no question about it. They ate tubers and they ate fruits and they ate. Yeah. Okay.
Probably more fruits than starch, I would guess.
Maybe. I don't think we know. You see, you say more one than the other. There's no quantitative. I know that they didn't eat a lot, because otherwise we would have a different biology. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
If you keep, just imagine, Rafi, that we kept this high acidity, through all the agriculture period. evolutionary speaking. Yeah, you would think that this is something, acidity, to keep acidity in the stomach is a hell of
That's
a thing.
expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, it costs a lot of energy to produce it in the first place, and to maintain it in the stomach walls. Okay, I don't remember how often these cells change, like few days, I think, every few days or so.
It's very short, yes.
It's crazy. Yeah. So you'd expect, that we would lose this high acidity, but it was so embedded in our biology that it's still there after 10,000 years of agriculture.
Yeah, and another piece of evidence that I like to mention is the AMY1 copy number variant, which is, of course, something that always comes up as a sign of selective pressure for increased starch consumption. And this was hypothesized that, so one of the predictions that came from that was that, well, if we ate more starch, we were better able to handle it. And this would be a sign of adaptation to a higher starch diet. But when we look at the outcomes that we care about in terms of can you handle carbohydrates, if we look at obesity or diabesity more exactly, you're not seeing any interesting association there in the genetics and the copy number variant and the glucose tolerance and the insulin sensitivity and all of those things. So really I don't think we know why the number of starch copies increased. We haven't yet been able to pin it to something, to an outcome that we can really care about. That's not very obvious yet. So I think that's still an open question. We know some of the selective pressures,
Yes,
but I don't know what it looks like for us today.
Yeah, and also the variability in the number of copies is so high that you see that it's not something that's fixed. It's not. It's really not so much associated with diet. So I don't. It doesn't look like this is the winner. But we have to admit one thing. There was an increase in the consumption of plants towards the end of the Stone Age. We see it from archaeological sites. We see stone tools, grinding stones, big grinding stones that actually you cannot take with you. So more sedentism, big grinding stones. You see residues as well. You see, you see some changes. The FADS genes. You see some changes towards the end of the period. But really, this is like less than 1% of the total Paleolithic period. So in the end, yes, with the decline in prey size, with the decline in prey, with the megafauna extinction, we started in our way towards agriculture. We started to consume more and more plants.
There's no doubt about that. Yeah,
but we continue to hunt. By the way, even the farmers still continue to hunt for some time after they became.
Yeah, and I think agriculture was this ability to get even higher returns than what animals could get us. So there's this stage where when you're a hunter-gatherer, plants aren't that interesting, but once you graduate to the status of of when you enter the Neolithic phase, then you can start to look at plants as a way to store large amounts of calories. More easily than you would with animals because of the new technology that came from the tools that we use for farming. So certainly it fit with what we saw in terms of the decline in prey size that you explored with Ran Bar-Kai in another paper. Maybe you want to say 2 words about that as a last point before we close up the conversation, because the decline in prey size has a lot to do with this decline in animal consumption during the late Pleistocene.
Yes. Yes, the return on large animals, like we said, it's maybe 50, maybe even higher. We don't have number for very large animals, but let's say medium-sized animals, the return is about 50,000 calories per hour. The return on smaller animals, like 1 kilo, 2 kilo animals, is more like that of on plants. So what happens when these start to disappear, even the medium size, then the return becomes almost identical. So so we consume more plants, and we are not the only one. There's a sizable section of the paleoanthropologists that agree that humans were played a part in the decline of prey size, in the extinction of what they call megafauna extinction, and which everybody knows started about 50,000 years ago, but now we find out that actually it started much earlier, maybe 500, 600,000 years ago. And we're just going to publish a paper very soon that shows that this was a trend in Israel, in the Levant, in our area, for the last 600,000 years ago, until the end of the Pleistocene. So if humans contributed to that extinction, it means that they were carnivores, they were hyper predators. Otherwise, wow, how could they influence the size of the animals, you know? They just hunted. They used to hunt, and they hunted the largest animal that were available at any one time.
Yeah, that was the.
Okay, Rafi, I'm sorry, but I need to go.
You have to go. You have to go. So someone's serving you food, I think. So, anyways, we covered.
Yeah, it's Friday night, you know.
Right. I think we covered
Friday
most
night.
of
We're invited.
The big criticisms that were levied our way, and hopefully we get to speak to Herman on the podcast very soon. So hopefully we'll get to do that again. But thank you, Miki, for your time. We'll talk. Okay. We'll talk again soon, and enjoy your meal.
Thank you very much. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye bye.